Today I'm going to talk briefly about processed foods because we all need to educate ourselves a bit about the modern food system and how it's damaging our health. Welcome to Realigning Health, where we explore ways to realign our health through practical, science-backed wellness, lessons from our ancestors and personal experience. What a lovely day. So at the moment I'm just outside Talsanai in North Wales, so just on the estuary. You can see Snowdon or Wyddfa in the distance, snow-capped at the moment. And today I'm going to talk briefly about processed foods because we all need to educate ourselves a bit about the modern food system and how it's damaging our health. Brody! Brody! Oh, bloody dog. Brody! As much as I'd like taking Brody with me, it's not very helpful. Right, stay. I'll give you something when you get home. Right, stay. Right, so the first thing to understand about processed food, or at least one of them, is they're false economy. And what I mean about this is that they might be cheap, they might be convenient, and they might taste great. I think that's something we could probably at least mostly agree on. That's only in the short term. When you take it over the long term, and I'm talking about years, and even me now, just early 40s, they start to take a toll, hence why I'm here, is they're not cheap in the end because they end up sapping your health, and the most valuable thing that you have is your health. So they also take away your time from your kids and your family because you end up going to the doctors more. You have chronic ailments, like I had gout. I couldn't get over heel bursitis because of chronic inflammation, and that's just me. I also had high triglycerides, but the list goes on. So the best thing to do is to start early and cut out as much processed food as you can, sticking with a whole food and a real food diet. You just see him just sneak away from me in the background. Hello Pickles. He's in quarantine at the moment. Not quarantined, he's in custody, as my wife likes to call it, because he's being a pickle. So, number two is, so what are processed foods? And you could argue everything in the supermarket is processed foods. The only thing that really aren't is if you grew it in your greenhouse, for instance. But the apple that's on the shelf or the cucumber, they've all been through a process. They've all been picked up from a producer, transported, unpacked and put on the shelf. That's a process, even though nothing has really happened to the food. But the more processing a food has, so the more preservatives it has, emulsifiers, colours, etc., the worse it is for your health, especially in the long term. And the data you can see out there now for non-communicable diseases like type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, even dementia and cancer related to processed foods is quite high. And when you consider that 70% of the supermarket is actually processed foods and only the 30% of the vegetable and fruit aisles are not, you start to see the extent of the problem. So part three is, how do you know what is a processed food? And that's actually quite easy once you know, and the more you practice the better you get at it. One system that I use is called the Nova Food Classification System, and this has 4 groups. Group 1 is whole foods and minimally processed foods like the cucumber and the apple we talked about, and group 2 is essentially like seasoning, salt, olive oil. those sort of ingredients. And then group 3 is typically group 1 and group 2 mixed together with maybe, if it's in the supermarket, with a preservative. And then group 4 is more additives, colourings, preservatives, emulsifiers, things that are added. Generally things that you wouldn't use in home cooking. And a typical rule is if it's got more than 5 ingredients, then it's group 4. The golden rule is avoid group 4. There is generally loads of alternatives to pick that are either group 3 or lower, potentially. If you must have group 4, and don't get me wrong, I have packet crisps on my weakness, so I have maybe some of them once a week, or for my wife it's a macaroon. But if you must have it, the rule of thumb is 5% of calories max, 10% if you're having a really bad day. Group 3 is in moderation, especially when it's store bought. If you make it from home, it's kind of a real food then, so you don't need to worry about it quite so much. The other way of looking at it, another simple rule, is when you look back at food as a whole and processed foods were not around during our evolution. So if you think about us, and we forget about this at times, is that we inherited the bodies that we have from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and we are evolved to eat the diets they had. So hunting, gathering. So a simple test is just to look at the food and say, was this around the time of hunter-gatherers? Apples, yes. Bananas, yes. Fruit, yes. Nuts, yes. Bread, no. Crisps, no. Cake, no. You can do a simple test like that. And that's basically it. So it's pretty simple. Now, I'm not a doctor. The research is my own. This isn't medical advice. Obviously, I encourage you to do your own research. But I think it's very interesting. And hopefully in the future, if we all take action and eat a better whole foods or real foods diet going forward, that companies that produce junk food and highly processed food will react to market forces and produce food which is better. And now he's relaxed. Right, sorry, that's rant over. Good boy. Right, stop it, puppet. Right, now don't Brody, stay. You're going to be a pickle again, aren't you? There he is. You okay, Broads? Little pickle.